Hello and welcome to the YYC Soccer Podcast. My name is Jason Komet and my co-host is Scott Strasser. Hey, Scott.
Hi, Jason. How's it going?
It's pretty good. I'm haven't been in the pod cave until just before recording, and it's getting a little cluttered in here. I think I'm gonna have to clean it up, but otherwise everything's going okay.
Maybe got to do some spring cleaning.
I think so. How about you? How's everything?
I don't want to tell you the state of my home office because every morning I come in here to start my work day and I go, you know what? Today's the day I'm finally gonna declutter this desk and the rest of the room. I think you can see a little bit of it in the background because we are on Zoom, or rather Alitu when we record these. You can see my background, but yeah, it's quite the state that I have in front of me here. But anyway, I'm doing fine. Excited to record another episode. I noticed this one is one short of a very significant milestone for us.
Yeah, episode 99. Yeah, well, we'll maybe talk a little bit more, reflect a bit more next week on episode 100. But anyway, let's get going on number 99. And if you haven't listened to the first 98 episodes of the YYC Soccer Podcast, Scott, what is our podcast all about?
So we touch on soccer in Calgary at the amateur, collegiate, and professional levels, discussing the teams and players from Calgary's soccer community, whether that's grassroots, amateur, and minor leagues, all the way up to the post-secondary, semi-professional, and fully professional levels.
And this week, our topics are going to include Cavalry FC. We'll preview their match versus Pacific on Saturday at Spruce Meadows. We'll preview the Calgary Wild's match versus the Montreal Roses on Sunday. That one will be at McMahon Stadium. We'll talk about some League One action, do some recaps, previews, have some other news updates. And we have an interview this week, Scott. Who's our interview with?
Yeah, earlier today, I chatted with Francesco Bartolillo, who is the new head coach of Cavalry's U21 team, which competes in League One Alberta. Francesco is an interesting story. He's from Calgary, grew up playing for the Villains competitively, and then went over to BC to play his post-secondary soccer with the UNBC Timberwolves. And he stayed in BC for pretty much the last decade plus, playing in the PDL with the likes of the Victoria Highlanders, and then got his coaching career started with UNBC. And he recently returned home to take over Cavs U21 job from our former podcast guest, Vikram Burke. So it's good to catch up with him and talk about the program and their game. They've only had the one game so far this season, but they did win it. As well as today's game, they're going to be taking on BTB. So good chat.
It was a good conversation, and we'll run it in our League One segment a little bit later on. But we're going to move off talking about the U21 team, and we're going to get to the first team and talk about Cavalry FC.
I'm Shamit Shom. This is the YYC Soccer Podcast.
Cavalry will be back at home this weekend. They're going to be taking on Pacific FC for the first time this season on Saturday at Spruce Meadows. Interesting matchup. They're tied right now in the table, although Cavalry does have a game in hand. Pacific is, they're not having the best of starts in 2025. Only 7 of a possible 18 points in their first 6 games. And they just had 2 pretty crushing injury blows in their Canadian Championship game, Jason.
Yeah, I just saw this release just a couple hours before we started recording, and Ronan Krat and Juan Quintana both injured their ACLs and they're out for the season. So I think that's a pretty significant blow. Krat's been playing regularly, scored a couple goals. And Quintana has been a regular player, I believe, on their back line. So they're really losing 2 of their pretty core players. So big blow for them.
Definitely. And Cavalry are missing some players too, we have to point out. Bradley Camden-Feo is serving his 3rd suspension after his red card. And then it looks like Diego Gutierrez, Eric Kobza, and Kenija Elva are out, and as we've talked about, Michael Baldissimo is going to be out for quite a while after injuring his knee in a recent match.
Last week, Maël Henry didn't dress for the Halifax game, and at the time, we didn't really know anything about why, but I was able to query that at the press conference this week, and Tommy Wilden Jr. wasn't real specific about what it was, but he said that we just held him on as a precaution and he should be fine and he should be good to go for this weekend. So not exactly sure what it was, but obviously nothing terribly significant. Keniji Alva was also the surprise, omission last week. And it sounds like he's got a thigh injury of some sort and he definitely won't play this week. I didn't get the impression that it's a long-term injury. Like it's not going to be one of these, how some of these other players have been out for extended periods, but he definitely won't be playing this week.
Looking at the form table, as mentioned, Cavalry, they're coming off a big win in Halifax. But before that, they had struggled in their home matches so far. What are you anticipating, Jason? I'm expecting a pretty decent match overall. I think Pacific often shows pretty well when they come to Calgary.
They're kind of on a bit of a low here right now, losing a couple of their players and, getting knocked out of the Can Champ. And I just think the season really hasn't gone probably the way they'd hoped thus far. So, it's always tough to play at Spruce Meadows. And I think the Cavs are probably due for a good performance at Spruce Meadows that's not involving Edmonton Scottish. So these teams match up usually pretty well, but I actually feel a bit more confident about this one going the Cavs' way.
Right on. And one more thing worth mentioning, we've noticed that former podcast guest and Calgary native Christian Greco-Taylor, who of course plays for Pacific, he has been getting a lot more playing time this season compared to last. He's still pretty young.
He is. Like last year, he was stuck behind Eric Lajeunesse, who had that left back spot kind of locked up earlier part of the year, but then he goes back to university every year to UBC. And after he went back to university, Greco-Taylor started to start all those games and played really well. And then this year, Lajeunesse came back from UBC again, like he's been doing every year, and he hasn't taken back his starting position. Greco-Taylor seems to have it locked down now. So I guess that's pretty good. I guess that's a sign that he's development is continuing for sure.
Of course, yeah. And just a few more Cavalry topics we want to touch upon. Since recording last week, we have gotten the dates for their next round series against Vancouver FC. Quite a long gap between the two matches, kind of strange. But the first leg, which is going to be out in Langley, is happening pretty soon, next week, in fact, Wednesday, May 21st. But the second leg isn't going to take place until July 8th.
I haven't really looked at the schedule, but is there a big gap in there maybe where there's some equestrian stuff going on at Spruce Meadows? I don't know. I just that was the only thing I sort of thought of when I saw the wide gap in there. But it does seem longer than usual. But a couple other notes about Cavalry. Last week, I believe we were musing about who could be on the team of the week, and we both agreed that Ali Musi was likely to be on there. And sure enough, he was. There were 4 players from Cavalry on the team of the week. That was Ali Musi, Tobias Warshevsky, Shimit Shom, and Levi Lang. I was pretty impressed with him in that last match. And when I saw his name show up on the team of the week, I was like thinking, well, it wasn't just me. I it must have caught other people's attention as well.
Yeah, I have to confess, I wasn't able to watch this game. I relied on the highlights, and of course they don't tend to show good defensive work on highlights, but it is good to see that he's found his feet quickly in Canada, right? Like I think this would have been his 3rd game, maybe. So to already be catching the attention of people who determine these CPL teams of the week is pretty promising. Jason, we have been talking about this offline for a few weeks now, but I guess we can officially bring it up now that Jake Davis, who we had on our podcast a few years ago, I guess, is no longer with the Cavalry coaching staff. He was the goalkeeping coach, American guy, and he's been replaced, at least on an interim basis, by David Odorico. We've got some details about him here written down. He's 34, is joining on an interim basis, as I said. He holds a UEFA A license. But yeah, you mentioned here that he spent his youth playing career with Calgary Foothills and then later joined the club's coaching staff as both a goalkeeper coach and academy coach. So he would be very familiar with Tommy Wilden Jr. One more thing worth mentioning before we segue toward the Calgary Wild is that I did see the current, like how many U21 minutes each team in the CPL has generated after the first 6 or 7 games. And it's noteworthy that Cavalry's up there already. Hey, they've got 730 plus minutes out of a required, 2,000? Very early into the season. It's very telling that they've relied a little bit more on youth this year than they have in previous seasons.
I don't think I've kept record of how quickly they've been accumulating those minutes over the years. I would say this is probably faster than typically has been.
Jason, I wanted to put you on the spot here and ask, after this first half dozen or so games, have any U21 players caught your eye that you think will be playing almost every match if they stay fit?
Well, Nico Moroniak is always, kind of been a someone I've been a particular fan of, but he kind of appeared in the first couple games and we haven't really seen much of him since. So, but as far as, other players, I would want to sort of comment. I'm a bit surprised Jay Herdman hasn't been playing much lately. He's gotten some of those U21 minutes, but I kind of figured he'd get a few more. And then, Mile Henry, I guess I'm always worried about his injury status because he's had a lot of problems with injuries, but I would think that out of all of those guys, he could maybe be the one that could really break out potentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he plays beyond his years, doesn't he? I always am surprised at how young he is because he plays with so much poise and assurance, right? Like on the ball, he plays like he's in the prime of his career, not just starting out. But I think he's still only 20.
I think he's like right around turning 21 right now because I think I looked at the number before and I think just barely qualifies for the U21 minutes.
I'd highlight left back Mihail Gerasimenkov. He's, I think, had some really promising showings, and this is now Lightning has struck twice with signings from Vancouver Whitecaps too after Jay Herdman last year. But yeah, he looks like a really good get. Really likes to get forward and get involved in the attack, but is also adept at defending.
I was a little bit surprised to see him starting up front this past game, but really, I guess he seems to have that capability to do so. His traditional position is left back, but it seems like he can play anywhere on that left side right now, and he's got a lot of offensive skill. And I've noticed in the games too, it's not like his defending is pretty decent too. Like I think obviously some of the plays he's made offensively have probably caught more people's attention, but I think he's got some defensive chops too.
Definitely.
This is Jacqueline Savixi, and you're listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast.
Okay, Scott, let's move over and talk about the Calgary Wild. Last weekend, we had the first home match of the season, and we only had to wait 1 week for the second home match of the season.
Yeah, this will be a really big test for them. They're taking on the Montreal Roses at McMahon Stadium on Sunday. Kickoff is at 3 p.m. And the game is going to be broadcast on TSN+, CBC Gem, the Northern Super League's website. Yeah, I mean, Montreal Roses, they dropped points for the first time in their last game in a surprise goalless draw with Halifax. That's Halifax's first point of the season. They've lost every other game they've played. Obviously, Montreal is leading the way at the moment, and it's going to be really tough for Calgary. Hopefully, there will be a lot of returning fans, and the Wild will be spurred on by an exuberant home crowd.
I have to confess, I have not really watched very much of the Montreal Roses. One player with the Roses I am familiar with, and I think you are too, Scott, is Tanya Boychuk. She's a Edmonton product, and she played for Foothills, I think, back in the day. Also played for St. Albert Impact, and she's also gone to the other side of the pond and played a little bit in Europe. So she also is another University of Memphis Tigers grad. So she's the captain of the club, and I think, a pretty influential, important player there. And yeah, like I just thought I'd mention, she's got some Calgary connections there. And but I don't really know too much about many of the other players.
No, me neither, to be honest. And yeah, like Tanya Boychuk, she's gotten 2 goals and an assist so far. So she's definitely involved with Montreal's offense, which is leading at the moment in the league. But yeah, obviously, you know, they're the only unbeaten team. We've beaten some of the teams that Calgary has lost to, I believe. So very tough game, even with the backing of the home crowd. And I'm hoping this week we'll see some goals. Last week, obviously, a goalless draw with Ottawa. So it would be great to see a big home crowd for the Wild get to cheer the team's first home goal.
For sure. Couple more notes about Calgary Wild and NSL. Michaela Moore and Ali Green were both called up this week to the New Zealand women's national team for a 2-match series versus Venezuela. I think that's right at the end of the month. They'll be away from the club, and Venezuela, that's who Sonia O'Neill plays for as well. So it may turn out that it'll be 2 Wild players playing against another Wild player in a couple international friendlies.
Yeah, that's quite the convenient coincidence, isn't it? I mean, Wild coaching staff they'll only maybe have to watch that one game to monitor their internationals.
Yeah, it's from that perspective, it's less film to watch, I guess. So remember the 3 stars? Said we were going to pay attention to that. This week's 3 stars are kind of interesting, I think.
Yeah, 2 of them we've talked about regularly on our podcast. Grace Storty was named the first star, which I thought was pretty cool. I did think she had a really good game against Ottawa. She was very aggressive in her runs forward, but she also had some pretty big tackles and blocks. And then second star, Kaylee Hunter. That means she's made this list every week, I believe, since the season kicked off. And then the third, yet another player who has a Calgary connection.
The third star is Kylie Norcus, and I'm presuming that's not like a name that probably too many listeners remember very well, but she is an American, and she played for Foothills last year in their UWS season. So she's not a born and raised Calgarian or anything, but last year she was on the pitch in UWS with with Grace Doherty, for example.
Yeah, and I believe she scored a couple of goals for Foothills, and now of course she's with the Halifax Tides. So she clearly played a big role in helping that team get that big goalless draw with Montreal.
Before we move off of NSL stuff, I think we got a little bit more to talk about regarding this week's second star.
Yeah, no surprise here, but Kaylee Hunter was named to Canada's U20 roster for the upcoming CONCACAF Championships, which are happening in Costa Rica just in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, they're going to play Panama on May 29th, Nicaragua on the 31st, and Mexico on June 2nd. Those will be their group matches. And then top 2 teams from each group, they qualify for like the knockout round, but I think probably more importantly, they qualify for the U20 Women's World Cup next year.
And I have to assume that winning or finishing second in this group should be a realistic ambition for Canada. I imagine the Mexico game should be pretty good, but I think Panama and Nicaragua, they've gotten some wins against in the not so distant past.
I would think the odds are in their favor for sure. So anyway, but we'll pay attention to that and see if Kaylee Hunter can score a few more goals. I think in the lead up to this for the U20, she scored some in the qualifying tournament. So
quite a few goals, I recall.
Hey everyone, this is Francesco Bartolillo, and you are listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast.
So Scott, let's talk about League One Alberta. One match on Tuesday, which involved a couple of Calgary teams. So we can just talk about that one, sort of give everyone the update. We had Callies versus Villains at Macron on Tuesday night.
Yeah, and it was a good night for Callies. They beat Villains. On the women's side, they won 3-0, so got a convincing clean sheet. And on the men's side, it was an even more convincing win for Callies as they beat Villains 7-2. 2 goals each from Anson Minty and Esron Johannes in that one. So it appears that, Villains are still really struggling in these first few matches of the League One season.
I looked at the roster for Villains right now, and one thing about compare and contrast, say, the Rangers League One men's roster and Villains League One men's roster. The Rangers roster has quite a few players that do have some League One experience, and Villains, their roster, they don't have tons of existing League One experience. I'm presuming that a lot of these players are players that they've brought up through their system and that sort of thing, which is great from a development point of view, but they didn't exactly take the team building approach, like let's go out and sign a bunch of players, external players to try and get start that way. So their team building approach has been a little bit different, and it's probably caused them to suffer in their results a little bit the last couple weeks.
So as usual, most of the League One action is taking place on Friday night. Only one matchup in Calgary this Friday. We've got Callies taking on Rangers at Macron, but there's a trio of games up in Edmonton involving Calgary teams.
Foothills is going to play Scottish. Villains are going to play St. Albert. BTB is going to face the combination of Cavalry U21 and Wild U21.
Yeah, but we've learned since last week that the Wild U21 games are not going to count in the standings. Jason, this was the team that suffered a 10-0 defeat in their opening game, which we talked about a few episodes back. So perhaps this decision is based on that outing and the realization that they're not quite ready for this level.
Mm-hmm. But they're going to continue to play in those doubleheaders matched up with Cavalry U21.
Speaking of Cavalry U21, I guess this is a good place to segue into our interview with Francesco Bartolillo. So let's run that interview now. I'd like to welcome Francesco Bartolillo to the podcast. Francesco is the new head coach of the Cavalry U21 team playing in League One Alberta. He grew up in Calgary, played for Villains, I know went off to BC for his post-secondary, and has coached in BC as well with the UNBC Timberwolves. Francesco, thanks for coming on our podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I mentioned a few details of your background, but maybe you can fill in the gaps and tell our listeners more about yourself. As mentioned, you grew up in Calgary, played for Villains competitively, but how did it come to be that you went off to, I believe, UNBC for your post-secondary career?
Yeah, absolutely. So grew up in Calgary, played for Calgary Villains, as you said, for majority of my youth. A couple clubs prior to that, but those were younger ages. And then once I graduated high school, I actually had a pretty bad leg injury that had me sidelined for about a year. So I ended up going to University of Calgary and was just basically doing my recovery, my rehab, that sort of thing. And then Tepofa Fukunle, who is currently the assistant GM of Cavalry and who I grew up with, a good friend of mine, was at UMBC at the time. And so he knew I was coming back from injury. I was trying to look at, okay, where do I want to go to school? Do I want to stay at home? That sort of thing. And basically, he recruited me up to UMBC along with the coach at the time, Alan Alderson. So they brought me up for a visit, sold me on the school, on the program. It was a young program. It just entered, basically just been in youth sports at the time. It was CIS for 2 years. So young program and building something has always been part of, my core. I've always enjoyed the idea of building something, being part of it, kind of that almost entrepreneurial mindset, if you will. And so it was really intriguing to me. So I ended up going up to UMBC. I played my 5 years university there, spent a couple summers in different places, went to Tucson to play PDL, a couple summers with the Victoria Highlanders in the PDL USL2. And then when I graduated in 2019, I had a brief stint back in Calgary for about 6 months and I played with the Calgary Foothills USL2 team. Mm-hmm. And that's when the university offered me a job at the university in the advancements office and the opportunity to start my coaching path, which was kind of what I was always, gearing towards. If soccer as a player wasn't going to be the path, then being a coach was the goal. And so I started coaching there. I was there for 6 years under Steve Simonson, who I played for 4 and then coached with for 6. So a great mentor and friend of mine. Also assisted him at the Victoria Highlanders in League One BC for the previous 2 years before the club folded. And so that was kind of the journey that brought me to where we are today, which is Cavs head of youth development and head coach for the 21s, which I started back in January.
Who was it? Tofa again, who reached out to you for that role? Yeah.
Yeah, so me and Tosa have been very close since we were 12 years old, and so always in constant communication. And basically, I knew that there was the possibility of the 21 role opening up, and I was ready for a change. I think you spend 11 years in one place, and you start to say, okay, now what's the next step? And for me, coming home was always a goal. Big Italian family here, so it was nice to have the opportunity to come home. So Toast reached out. He said, "There's this opportunity. You should kind of throw your hat in the ring and see what happens." And so I did that, and kind of a quick, 6-week turnaround from when I got the call from TOFA to when they offered me the position. So it was basically, let's call it December to January, 6th was when my start date was as the turnaround time.
I imagine having coached at the post-secondary level for so long, it's a similar age group, Cavs U21, maybe a bit younger, would you say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a bit younger. Like obviously at the U Sports level, you'll have some of the same players coming in as the age of the Cavs U21. So our makeup of our team is essentially all 2007s and 2008s, which are grade 12s and 11s. We do, sprinkle in a couple players from the first team who aren't maybe getting on the roster that week or getting as many minutes as they need. But even those players are more often than not under 20, actually. I think in our first game of the season, we had, Chan and Harms, who are 19 years old, and Owen, who's 21. So we had a young core joining us as well. So it is that younger age group. And at the university level, you'll get maybe 3 or 4 of those each year, but those are typically your first years coming in. The exceptional ones will make a lineup right away, but most of them will be roster or depth players in their first year. So there is that kind of connection for sure. But I would say in general, the university game tends to be maybe, 3-ish, 4 years older than what I'm coaching now, which is fun. It's a fun change up.
So you mentioned your first game. I think it is your only game so far, but you have another one tomorrow. But that was a 2-0 win over St. Albert a few weeks ago.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it was an exciting game. We knew that we were prepared. We had a very good preseason with the group. We spent a lot of time, 4 weeks essentially playing some games, working on our structure, working on our DNA, and I think we were well prepared for it. And it was a game that boys were up for because they every year that we've come into the league, the first couple games have always been a challenge for the 21s. And it's not a surprise. You're dealing with a lot of 16, 17, 18-year-olds who they're used to being in one environment, whether that be their CMSA, their EMSA teams, whatever it might be, APDL. And then you're going to that next level. You're going to that jump up, which is League One Alberta, top university players from across the country, actually, if you look at some of the teams, ex-pros, this sort of thing. So we did our best to prepare them mentally and physically for that. And then on the day, the boys were fantastic. They came with the right energy. They used, our superpowers, which are a couple of things that we feel that we have an advantage of over other groups. And it was a very professional performance from a young group of men who, went in and got a road result, which we were really happy about.
Yeah, especially, clean sheet on the road. Can't ask for a better start. So you're going to be taking on BTB tomorrow. It's been almost 2 weeks since your last game. What do you make of that team, and have you gotten to watch any of their matches so far?
Yeah, so BTB will be their 4th game of the season, and they'll be our 2nd. So they've got a few more games under their belt. They're sitting top of the table right now, and they've shown to be a team with lots of threats. They've punished mistakes that other teams have made, and they've got a very good back line. They've got 2 ex-professionals in there. It's a good team. And again, as most teams will be, they're going to be older than us, a little bit more experienced. So I think it's a good challenge for our boys. I think that first game of the season was, again, a very difficult game that gave us a taste of what the league is like, because I think St. Albert Impact, despite the first couple of results they've had, they're a very good side. They're very well coached, and they will be a good team in this league. So I think we got a taste of what it's like, but now this might be that next level of competition. So it's something that we need to rise to. And, we've done our homework and we're prepared for what to expect. But, you can only drop so many different things on the tactics board. In the end, it's going to come down to, traveling there, being prepared for the game, and making sure we take care of our end. And then, as football goes, whatever happens, happens. But if we do our things right, if we can take care of our net, if we can finish our chances, I think we have a good chance of getting something out of the game for sure.
And you've talked about some of the players on the U21s this year who have that pro experience, guys like Chan and Chanda, Michael Harms, Owen and Toniak. I think Holiday is Fuster is in that? Yeah.
So Fuster is the number 1, but Holiday will likely play a handful of games for us as well.
Okay. You've touched on this, but I mean, how important is it to have that kind of experience in the team when they're playing older teams, particularly?
Yeah, it makes a massive difference, right? Like, I mean, if you look at our team makeup without any of the boys who play down, the only ones who really have any pro experience right now is James McGlinchey. who made his professional debut actually against Scottish, which was fantastic. Very well deserved, an incredible young man. And then Nevin Fuster, goalkeeper, who's with the first team full time, but hasn't had a debut moment or anything like that yet. So from our actual signed U21 group, those are the two players who have that experience. So when you do get the Chans of the world and the Harmsies and the Owens who come down and play, it makes a massive difference just to help, guide the younger ones, get them through those rough patches that you're inevitably going to face during games. If you look at the impact game that we had first game of the season, the first 10, 15 minutes were rough waters. They were right after us, right off the get, corner kick, free kick, shot on target, all inside the first 6 minutes. So the older experienced players definitely help you ride those waves and get over those moments of the game. But then, once the game settles and we can get into it, I think that's where our footballing shows. That's when our DNA comes to life. And so it's nice to have those older players just be able to get you through those tough moments and then shine as the game settles itself. And I think we have a nice makeup of those older ones coming down, but we also have some of our younger ones who are shown to be very good leaders. Even somebody like a James McClinchy who is, on a development contract with the first team full time, but with us full time as well. And he's been our captain. He's been our leader from the start. And then you have a couple other ones sprinkled in who are 2007 borns who played on the team last year, have experience. So it's a really fun mix. Yeah, I'm really lucky to have the group that I do.
What are you hoping to see this season? I know a team like the Cavalry U21, a lot of focus is on development and preparing the players for that next level. I know you can make that argument for every team in the league, really, but is there a number of wins you hope to achieve, a number of points, or is it less about that and more about advancing the players?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, you've hit the nail on the head. It's about development for us with this group. We want to see as many players as we can, go on to make their professional debuts, sign development contracts, earn first team contracts. That is the goal. That is the number one objective of this group. And I think there's lots of talent here. And I think it's exciting. And you'll hopefully start to see some of those players earn those opportunities. So that is definitely the focus. And that's at our core. But we are still Cavalry FC. And so anytime we step on the pitch, we have the expectation to play the game within our DNA, to try to do it the right way and try and get a result. And so we haven't necessarily set a point total or something like that just yet, but that is our objective, is to finish as high in the table as we possibly can. Obviously, we can't get the Canadian Championship spot, which is what most of the clubs are after in the League One. But it'd be something special to earn it and have to pass it on anyways. So I think we'll set some pretty ambitious targets for this group, and knowing that a lot of them will be out of our control. So we'll control our controllables. We'll take care of our business, and then the results, if they come, fantastic. If they don't, we'll look at why and see how we can improve on it. But yeah, there's going to be no lack of ambition from this group. There'll be high targets, and we'll try and claw and scrape our way there. And if we fall short, we fall short as a group, and we'll be okay with that. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at as a team for the U21s.
That was my last question, Fran. But is there anything else you'd like to mention or shout outs you'd like to give to anyone out there?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to just shout out, obviously, Cavalry FC, the organization itself. I've only been here for 4 months now, and in my time here, I can see very quickly why they are one of, if not the most accomplished clubs in CPL history. From front office to tech staff to support staff to everybody who runs stuff at Spruce Meadows. Like, it's such an incredible organization, and I feel very lucky to be part of it. And especially if I look at the tech staff that I work with quite closely. So Tommy, Jay, Nick, and obviously Tofa being sprinkled in there. They've been incredible group to work with, incredible mentors to me. Jay, who is technical director of the club, who is kind of my direct report, has been such a fantastic mentor to me early on, giving me advice, helping show me the way, but also giving me that freedom and autonomy to be my own coach. It's been fantastic. So yeah, just thank you to the club for the opportunity. And I'm excited to continue being part of Cavs.
Thanks again to Francesco Bartolillo for coming on our podcast and talking about his early days of coaching with Cavalry U21. Jason, right after we'd signed off, I talked with him. I asked him if he remembered a goal that he had scored back when he was playing for Victoria Highlanders. I'm not sure if you remember this, but in 2017, Foothills finished second in their conference. thanks to a goal that Francesco scored against them in the 90th minute. And that gave Portland Timbers reserves the league title, which meant that Foothills had to travel down to Portland for their opening playoff game. And when Francesco joined up with Cavalry, Tommy Wilden Jr. mentioned that goal and talked about how many thousands of dollars it cost Foothills because they had to travel for playoffs instead of getting a home game.
It's funny that did come up earlier this year.
And that game is still on YouTube, believe it or not. I think Simon Salazar, his channel, posted a lot of former PDL Foothills games. So if you're interested, you could probably find it. And yeah, very late goal. It started with a throw-in, and Francesco said it felt good at the time because he grew up playing for Villains, and Foothills was always kind of the the villain to them. So good goal for him to get, but funny that he's now coaching alongside the guy that he scored that goal against.
I am Christian Greco-Taylor, and this is the YYC Soccer Podcast.
Last segment of this episode, Jason, we haven't really talked yet this year about the Alberta Major Soccer League, but the season did start on Wednesday earlier this week. So I guess we can talk about it a little bit because there are some matches coming up, and the season does run until the end of July.
The AMSL traditionally was always the top amateur league in Alberta. It's now been kind of supplanted by League One Alberta, but it's still running in much the similar format that it did. It has 8 teams, and there's 4 teams based in the north and 4 teams based in the south. And so the 4 teams in the south, well, one of them is Lethbridge, and then the 3 teams from Calgary they're actually a little bit different between the men's side and the women's side. On the men's side, it's Blizzard, Callies, and Villains. On the women's side, it's Blizzard, Callies, and Foothills.
And as mentioned, the season kicked off on Wednesday with Callies beating Villains 4-0.
The other thing to mention, I guess, about this is the winner of the AMSL does become the provincial representative in the Canadian Amateur Championship. So, there is still a pretty significant carrot, to, performing well at this level.
Yeah, and that's called the Challenge Trophy, right? It's one of the longest serving national sports competitions in Canada, I believe. So we're recording this right before the May long weekend, and the Calgary Minor Soccer Association is hosting a big Victoria Day long weekend tournament all throughout the weekend. So there's going to be lots of soccer happening throughout the city, not just at the pro and League One levels, but also including everything from U10 up to U17 teams.
Yeah, another big tournament in minor soccer. It's great. I think, why not? There's an extra time off school right now, and I'm always amazed at how complex these tournaments can be, and how it all stays together, because it's just, there's so many moving parts.
Absolutely. I believe there's actually a press release that I got about this tournament. I believe there's something like 140 teams, and lots of them are coming from out of city, but it ranges from U10 tiers A, B, C, and D, all the way up to U17 tiers 1 through 4, and U19 tiers 2 through 3. Yeah, games will be taking place at the Shane Holmes West Soccer Dome, the Calgary Soccer Center, and Shoaldice Athletic Park. So if you're in any of the areas, you could catch a game or two.
Thank you for listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast. You can have this podcast downloaded to your device as soon as it becomes available by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or other platforms. Check out our website at yycsoccer.com, where you can look through our episode archive and find other options to listen, including our YouTube channel. We also have links there so you can buy Scott's book about Calgary soccer history. You can leave a question or comment in the Contact Us section of our website. You can also interact with us on social media, such as Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky, where our username is YYC Soccer 403. Thanks for listening.